Yeah, I think my microphone should be good. If you just wanna, if you give me a thumbs up, Karis, if it's good, perfect. So my name's Dan. I spend a lot of my time sea watching. I've always lived in South Wales, so I live in Swansea, but I currently live in Gannet. But most of my time I
Oh, Dan, you've frozen for me. I'm not sure if anyone else is having difficulties. I think you're all good now.
Great, there we are. Yeah, so a lot of my time I've spent sea watching and looking for birds, and you've got all that experience then that you can share and mould into finding your own birds, and it becomes easier the more you try. So a lot of people get off-put by sea watching and looking for coastal birds because it can be really difficult. The conditions can be awful, especially if it's rain, if there's winds. When you've got all of them and you're sitting on top of a cliff top, it's not that pleasant and you're just getting battered from all angles. But it's a lot of fun. It's a lot more challenging to find birds, but it's a lot more rewarding when you start to pick out things. So the presentation I'm doing today is mainly looking at those west coast birds that might be a bit tricky to see and a bit tricky for people to recognize. So we're going to look at them. So I'll just start the screen share. Ooh. Karis, could you just blink it on so I can screen share, please?
You should be able to screen share.
Still saying disabled participant screen sharing.
Oh, 1 second.
Perks of working with technology. A lot easier in a room with people.
How about now?
Perfect. Now, it's only letting me doing it once. When I click on it, it's coming up and then saying disabled.
Oh, technical difficulties.
Now, it's the one thing they tell you, well, children, animals, and technology are the things never to work with. And then I work with all three.
Made you the host, so you should be able to do it now.
Aha, perfect. So, hopefully everyone can see this, but I'm on screen share, so it'll rely on. Perfect. So the golden five. So these are the 5 main things you should look at when you're looking at birds. You've got the colour, the patterns, the shape, the movement, and the sound. It may sound difficult to remember all 5, but when you're looking at birds, it's really easy that when you pick something out, for example, an oyster catcher, you've got that dominant colour of black and white, and then the patterns, it's got a breast strap, it's got the sides, and then it's got white on the underparts. The shape of it, so it's fairly large, it's upright stance, it's got a tall beak that is used for prodding, and then it wades lifting one leg out. Same with movement, you've got that feeding style of using the prodding beak, and then you've got the sound. So flocks of waders are much easier to do when you look at the colours, the movement and the sound. But then when you're looking at something like a tern, it's better to look at the movement, the shape and the pattern. So when you've got all 5 things, it's easy to pick out 1 or 2 of them, and that can help you to distinguish what you're looking at. But if you can't work it out based off of your knowledge, it also gives you a good indication of where to start looking in a bird guide. So if you know that it's a tall bird with a large prodding beak, you know you're looking at a wader, and you know then to look at the birds that have got the large beaks used for prodding in the sand, and that's to find things like lugworm or small sand creatures. So it's easier to look at what your sort of interpretation of the bird is before trying to go into step 5 or 6 and trying to just instantly recognize the bird. If you're struggling to identify it, it's better to look at 1 or 2 of the 5 things to remember, and then that gives you a good indication of where to start looking. Even the most experienced people still need to look in bird guides and still need to look on apps and need to use call apps to find birds. No matter how novice or how advanced people are, you can't know everything. There's so many different birds. We get so many migrants now. We get so many vagrants from other countries. It's really difficult to know everything. So don't be off put if you don't know what it is, because I mean, I still carry a bird guide around with me, and I've been birding for a lot of, well, many, many years, and in a lot of different countries. So the first thing we're going to look at is waders. So if you want, you can have a go now. There's 6 birds here. If you want to have a go at seeing if you know what the 6 are. So I'll give you a few minutes just to do that. So you've probably noticed there is no number 1, and that was because it was on a different page, but these are the ones. You've got 2, 3, 4, and then 5, 6, and 7. So they're all birds you should have seen, or you've probably seen in your lifetime. So they are in a mixture of plumages. I think most are fairly recognizable, the ones that you would see in the plumages you would see. Okay, so let's have a look at them. So like I'm saying with the golden 5, when it comes to identifying birds, it's so much easier to think of 3 things to distinguish that species. Like I said, with the oyster catcher, you've got red or orange beak and legs, you've got black and white plumage, and then you've got the bill is fairly long. So you've got 3 things then, 3 good indicators that when you look at it, those are the 3 things you remember. And it's really great when you're looking at large wader flocks, you can sort of say, okay, this is an oyster catcher. I'm looking at it's white on the underparts, black on the top. So as they're moving, I can see the 2. So as we go along, you'll notice now that we've got 3 indicators for every species. So let's start off with curlews. Curlews are fairly large, so there's only 2 for this one. They've got the long bill and it's curved, and that's because the curlew puts its beak on the top of the sand and then curls it round, as opposed to prodding. So they're not quite a prodder like a knot or like an oyster catcher would be. They're more of a digger, so they tend to dive deeper. They are very, very large. So when you're looking at wading birds, the curlews are one of the largest we get. And the other one is their noise. They're very, very vocal, and they make a lot of noise, especially when they're in groups with one another. So they're really great at being very vocal. So it makes things a lot easier when you're listening out for them. So the next one is a red knot. So they're only red during the breeding season. In the winter, when we typically see them, they're more of a greyish white colour. So the easiest way to tell them, they're larger than others. So knot are fairly large. You don't often as large birds. Out of the wading species we get, knot are fairly large. They're also very bulky. If you look at the breast area, they are very heavily breasted, very small head compared to a very large body. And they've got medium legs. So they're not long enough that they'd be in the deeper water. They're more of a coastal bird as opposed to a wading species in water. And that's because of the size of their legs. But the other thing, you've got the short bill, so they will be part of the prodding family. So they are the ones that will eat in the sand, eat in the mud, because they have that bill that they can start prodding and picking stuff out. And then the last one on this one, we've got the ringed plover, which is probably one of my favourite wading species. So they have a very bolt upright stance. So most waders tend to crouch and hunch over when they're looking in the sand. Ringed plovers are much more alert. They tend to stand bolt upright, and they sort of look at their surroundings more than where they're looking for food, if that makes sense. They have a very rounded head, but also have that rounded back and the rounded breast and the rounded bum to go with it. So they're basically a very perfectly shaped oval with a little tail at the end. And then they have a very short bill. So these are not ones that eat in the sand, they're ones that eat on the sand. So that gives you a good indication of remembering where the species you saw it was in the habitat you saw it is. So the short bill will be the ones that will pick off the top. Things like turnstone as well are another good one that just pick off the top. The next three we had is the black-tailed godwit. So it's a rusty colour during the summer. During the breeding season, there will be that rusty orange colour. They have a very long bill, so again, another prodding species, and very tall birds. So that means you typically see them in water as opposed to on mud flats. So it's another good habitat thing. The long bill is slightly curved. So when you have a bar-tailed godwit as opposed to a black-tailed godwit, the tail is a good giveaway. It's barred as opposed to being black, and it's also got that upwards curve towards the end of the bill. But black-tailed godwits, nice orange bill, black tip on it, and then perfectly straight and that rusty colour. Redshanks, they have a speckly pattern to them. So you either see them in the summer where they're almost all grey and all sort of rusty black colour, and then you see them in the winter where they're a lighter grey, but they have that speckly pattern to the breast especially and to the head. They've got the short red bill and the bright red legs, so they're really easy to tell apart from other birds. If in doubt, just look at the legs. If they're bright red, you've got a good indication that you've got a redshank. And then we've got snipe, which is another brilliant bird that I enjoy watching. So they have a very long bill, almost the same size as black-tailed godwits in relation to the body. They're a little bit longer, and that is because they typically eat in mud, so they like to put their beak down into the mud to pick stuff out that way. They've got very short legs, which means you won't find them in water necessarily, you'll find them on the edges. So you'll find them more on the edges of reeds, on the edges of marshes, anywhere where there's small water where they can still get at the mud. That's typically where you'll see snipe. You've also got that stripe pattern to them. The heads are very heavily streaked, as well as the back has got these really nice beige, I'm not sure if you can see my cursor, but they've got really heavily beige sort of stripes going along the back of them. But they're one of the smaller species of waders we get. And obviously you see them in different habitats. So it's another good thing that when you're looking at birds, it's a nice thing to look at your habitats, note where you've seen them. Even if you keep a field guide, note down where you are, and I note down the habitat as well. Just if I'm down at WWBIC Llanelli, it's salt marsh, it's reed beds, and then you've got the sand flats as well and the mud flats out on the estuary. And that just gives you a good indication. If you've seen a species there, you've got a good thing of where it is, and that gives you a good idea of what you've seen previously. So we've got some sounds now, so hopefully, as I flick to another page, you won't see the page. Oh, we've got that. So in theory, you are all on the presentation. So we have the first sound. If you can just tell me what the sound is. Obviously, you're all muted, but you can just note down what the species is. They're all species you would have heard. So we have species number 1 coming up. I think everyone has probably heard this one. It's a species that we get in large numbers, especially on the south coast of Wales, and one that I definitely still like to see. Species number 2. it's that piping noise we're looking for. And we've got number 3. And finally, number 4. So just go over them again to see if you had them. Again, they're really obvious species that you probably would have heard but not necessarily picked out what the sound is. So number 1 was this little one. And that one's an oyster catcher. So oyster catchers have a very, very vocal noise to them. They use it a lot for communication with one another. Especially when they're in large groups, they tend to get very agitated with themselves very easily. So they are very vocal species. They almost sound to me like the dog squeaky toys. It's like when you squeeze a toy, you can't hold that noise for forever. So when you squeeze it, it makes that squeaking noise. And that's your oyster catcher. So the second one we had, it's a bit confusing, there was 2 species. So this one was your redshank. So redshanks almost sound like they're saying the word chew. So if you listen to it, they sound like they're just repeating the word chew over and over. There's a very easy way when we're looking at the 5 things. You've got 3 plumages, but you've also got that sound element now. That's a good indicator. If you can't see the bird, you can start to learn them off sounds. We have number 3. Which was a curlew. So curlews are very notorious for their noise. They make a lot of noise, especially when they're wading in things like salt marshes, salt flats, and on marshlands, because they can't see one another. They make a lot of noise to keep in contact, so they have those contact calls. But the easiest way to remember it, they hold that bottom note and then let it go. So you have that bottom note that they hold and then it just erupts. So instead of it being like a constant held note like the redshank would be, it just squeaks off at the end. So when you listen to it again. So it's that low to high, but they're not holding that high note. It's just coming out as opposed to being a held note. And then finally, number 4, I'm sure everyone has heard one of these. They're one of the best noise to ever come out of a wader. So lapwings are very unique in their noise, so they can be quite difficult to see because they're very difficult to spot, especially when they're breeding, but you will hear that noise. So that noise is very much like, well, to me, It sounds like a children's toy where it's not any sort of foaming noise, it's just all different squeaks and things. It's always like the children's toy trucks. They always sort of make some sort of noise. The noise doesn't quite make sense, especially for a bird, but it's just it's just a unique noise. So it's very difficult to describe that one, but it sounds like a children's toy. So finally, we've moved on for our waders. We've got terns next. So terns can be very difficult to ID, especially when you just see a flash of a bird go past you. But we're going to work through them. So number one, we have sandwich terns. Sandwich terns dive like a gannet. So they'll turn upright and then shoot downwards. So the easiest way with these, they have a nice white tail. They've got this little shape in the tail, but the white tail is very easy to distinguish from the other tern species. So we've got that solid white tail. We've got a very pale shape to them. So they give that overall impression that they're a white bird, as opposed to the other terns that may have other colours in them. They give that impression that when you look at it instantly, it's a white bird. We got the caps. On all tern species, caps are a good way to notice what the species could be. So sandwich terns, they have a solid black cap on them, and that goes right the way around to the nape, which is the back of the neck area, and we have a black bill on it as well. So they are one of the larger tern species we get, and then that goes next to little terns, which is the smallest tern species we get. So again, we're looking at the same three things on all the species. We got the tail is white, again, like a sandwich tern, but that tail looks like streamers. So instead of it being a solid block like a sandwich tern is, instead it's almost like streamers. So it comes out in a nice flock, almost like a swallow, as opposed to a solid one like a house martin. So it's a nice way to familiarize yourself with what the shape is. So looking at the wings of it, the wings are white with these black trailing edges. Sandwich terns also have these black trailing edges, but on a little tern, it is just the outermost parts that are black. And then you've got this little fringing in the middle. And then the cap and bill, again, is another way to tell it apart. Black cap with a white forehead, and then a bright yellow bill. So every tern species has got a different colour. So the bottom two are probably the two that most people get confused with. So on the left, we've got a common tern. So we'll start from the top. Common terns, black cap and a nice point onto the bill. The bill is a cherry red colour. So it's not a bright shade of red like you would get in a red shank. It's like a cherry tomatoey red. So it's nice and red with like a slight hint to it of black at the very, very tip of the bill. The back colour is a grey colour, but that grey is only on the wings and only on the back. The breast is white. And then the wings and the tail are black. So when you're looking at Arctic terns, the Arctic terns is a very deep red, almost burgundy colour. And that goes for the legs as well. They're not a very bright orangey red colour that you would expect. They're very dark and quite easy to see between the two, especially when birds are sitting down. Looking at the wings are a dusty grey colour, but also the breast has some of that grey on it as well. So instead of it being a nice crisp white, it has got that grey edge to it. But they're not as dark as your common tern. Common terns are all grey. This is more like a hint of grey. And then looking at the wings as well, instead of being solid black, they have a light grey to them. So they give that overall impression that they are a lighter colour overall, especially when they're in flight. So you've got three things to notice on both of the species there, as well as all the other terns. So next up, we're getting more into the challenging bird species now. So we've got our terns. You can probably see a lot more of these around the southwest coast and west coast, as opposed to further up towards Aberystwyth. We've got auks in winter plumage. A lot of us love to visit Skomer Island and Stockholm, but when you see birds in summer plumage, they're very easy to tell apart. They're always very bright colours, but then when you come into winter plumage, they tend to just look drab and black, really. So looking at our puffins, on each of these birds, rather than having 3 points, it's better to pick out 2 easy things. So we've got the bill on each species is very noticeably different. So the puffins still have that very heavy puffiny shape to them. And when you look at the white is on the breast area as opposed to trailing round. So our guillemots then have got a very narrow shaped bill to them, the upward bill. And then the white is all the way across the front, all the way across towards the chin strap area. So it gives that impression that the whole underneath is all white, as opposed to your puffin, which has got a very heavy black break, as well as your razor bills, they'll also have a black break in them as well. And the bill is very noticeably larger. So when you're looking at the heads as well, the heads give that impression. Guillemots, white underneath, white heads, white chin, and a black top to them. When you're looking at razor bills, they've got a nice rounded white head and then black on the back sides of them, as well as slowly coming round. So we'll put this into use by looking at this. I'll just mute this. So this is from Sweden. It's very different. So if we have a look at the wading, the auks, when you're looking at them in flight, can you see the difference between them? You've got the guillemots then, which, oh, that's not what I want. Guillemots give that overall impression that they're all white except for that black area. So as you see them going past, you get that first impression of some are white and then some are black as they go past. So we look at this part. So we have got freeze frames in here. So you can see these are your very iconic guillemots coming in. And some of these are molten guillemots as well. But when you're looking at them, you get that overall impression of the all white and the white head. So even when they go past at rapid speeds, you're picking up white underneath, black on top. So this is typically what you see when you're down towards Strumblehead, Skomer area. You get that first sheen of black, and then as they turn, that overall impression of the white. We'll just go back to the video areas. So when they're going past, you can see that white standing out more to you. And it's the same when you're looking at auks on the horizon. Sometimes even the most experienced people won't commit to a species. It goes down as an auk species because it can give that overall impression of being white, but the heads are black, which means it could be a molten guillemot or it could well be a puffin. So it's very difficult to tell them apart at such a distance, but it's very easy to look and go, okay, it looks almost all white underneath, which would lead you towards a guillemot then. Moving on from auks, we have one of the more challenging bird species. So the easiest way to tell these apart is learning your Manx shearwaters. So Manx shearwaters are very easy to distinguish. They'll ride the waves and shear, which is why they're called shearwaters. They'll shear almost touching the waves on each stride. So they have a very rounded head. They have a very narrow bill that's longer than most other birds. The underneath of the wing is all white. So when you see the top of it, it's all black. When you see the underneath, it's all white. So again, like your guillemots, it gives that overall impression of the underneath of it being white with these black framing edges to it. So you have these black frames around that white area, as well as a nice white belly. So when you're looking out at sea, because we're in Wales, most of the things we get are Manx shearwaters. So if you learn a Manx shearwater, you'll know when something isn't a Manx shearwater. That's the easiest way I've done it. I've learnt my Manx shearwaters, learnt my auks, and then when it comes to bigger birds that are a bit more noticeable, like your skuas, they aren't as common as shearwaters. So when we're seeing them, we'll only see, especially on very good days down Strumble Head, you'll still only get 2 or 3 skua species in amongst hundreds of shearwaters. So if you learn your shearwaters, you'll know something isn't a shearwater, and the easiest one we get here are manx shearwaters, and maybe the odd sooty tern, sooty shearwater, sorry, that we'll get from the Irish Sea. So the first one we have is our Pomeranian skua. So this one is a just molting adult. So the adults have got this bright yellow strap around the head. It's almost all black. The belly on it is white with these dusty armpits. They have a black underwing, so nice solid black colour. And then they're very noticeable for having a spoon on their tail, and that is literally like a spoon shape. So it comes out fairly large, and then it rounds off as a spoon, which you can just see there. So even in juvenile birds, we've got this flat tail that's almost starting to develop a spoon at the end. They're very bulky birds, so they give that overall impression of they are larger. And then when we look at the underwings of a juvenile pom, we've got that white, and then we've got white fringing to the underparts as well. So it gives that impression of being black, but then with these white parts coming through. So Pomeranian skuas are fairly common, but the most common skua species we get are Arctic terns, Arctic skuas. I'm getting mixed up between terns and skuas now. Arctic skuas are the most common skua species we get. So Arctics are very, very similar to poms, but there are easy ways to tell them apart. We have, instead of having that yellow neck brace, it's almost like a whitish colour. So it's like a, what do you call it? A cream colour, as opposed to being yellow. When we're looking at the head and the bill, it's almost a brownish shade as opposed to being jet black. So when you immediately look at the head, your brain will decide whether it looks black or whether it'll look beige or brown. So it's best to go with that overall impression that you get first off, rather than trying to overcomplicate things, especially when it comes to other bird species. And ID guides will say, does it look like a brownish grey or does it look like a greyish brown? It's better to immediately look at the bird and see what your brain comes up with. That's your first impression, and that's your overall impression of the bird. So looking at the tails are very different. They have a slither of a tail as opposed to a nice spoon like a pom has got. So adults are very easy to tell apart. The underwings are black on your Pomeranian skua, and they're nice and beige white colour on your Arctic skuas, as well as this under rump area where it's black on poms and a nice brownish colour on Arctics. So Arctics give that overall impression that they are a lighter coloured bird. So with your poms, they look very dark. Arctics will look very light in colour. So it's a nice, easy way to tell them apart. It's just that overall impression. As most people say, is just go with your gut. If you look at a bird and go, oh, okay, it's a skua, it looks very dark, you've got a Pomeranian skua. But then it's worth bearing in mind when it comes to juveniles, one of the, well, the most common one we get are Arctic skuas. So Arctic skuas, instead of having a long tail to them, they have like a rounded off tail, very flat. Especially when they turn onto their sides, it does look like the adults one, where it's very flat in shape and in size. When we're looking at it, Pomeranian skuas are very bulky looking. Arctics almost have that slender outward stretch to them. And likewise with the wings. Pom skuas, the wings are very dark with light patches to them and this light fringing. Arctic skuas have got this nice white window, but they've almost got a speckled look to them. So instead of it being very light in colour and giving that impression of it's like dark and then white patches, it almost looks like it's streaked and speckled to them. So when you're looking out on them, you'll be able to tell the difference just looking at underwings, but also that tail as well. That'll help you in identifying which of the two you've got. But these are the two most common species we get, Arctic skuas and Pomeranian skuas. There are other ones we get which are long-tailed skuas and great skuas. Great skuas are, if you're looking at herring gulls and less a blackback, your great skua is a greater blackback. They're huge, huge birds, very dark, very bulky, and they're just, well, beasts really. So when you're looking at a skua and you're trying to distinguish whether it's one of the two, Pomeranian or Arctic, when you get a great skua, it's massive, it's very bulky, and it generally looks like it could tear down a house because they are huge things. But these are the two easiest ones to distinguish. So like I said, if you learn your shearwaters, when you have streams of shearwaters going through, you'll know if one of them isn't a shearwater, and then you'll be able to work out using the 3 points which one it could be then. So we have here gannets, but gannets come in all different colours, all different structures, but they follow the same pattern. They all dive the same way, whether it's a juvenile or first calendar year, or whether it's a 20-year-old adult, they all dive the same way. So if you're in doubt and looking at it, then if you just watch it for a little while, it'll dive. Most of the time they need to feed, so they'll begin diving. So they have this very aerodynamic teardrop shape to them. Head first, wings tucked in, and then they'll just hit the water then. So these are the 3 most common stages of gannets, we'll say. So if you're down towards Pembrokeshire area, or whether you're up towards Aberystwyth, a lot of the time you will see gannets offshore, and that's just because of their feeding ranges, as well as Cardigan, the feeding ranges of them, wherever the dolphins are, or wherever there's a lot of activity in the sea, like boats, you'll typically find a lot of gannets. So most people will recognise a gannet based off of picture 3, which is this one. And that third picture is just white with black wingtips. So even as a small, small dot, you'll see white with very heavy black wings to them. And that's your gannet. So this one is a 2nd calendar year molten into a 3rd calendar year, which is your middle picture. So it's still got this white head to it, and then it's got these black wings. But the black wings extend towards the middle of the body, and you've got this white coming through. So as juveniles, they're brown, so you can see it's molting through. So it gives that Dalmatian effect, but it still follows that same structure, the bowed wings in that perfect curve, ready for tucking in to dive. But also that very slender pointed tail, that very long elongated head as well. And then we've got juveniles, which are all brown, but they've got a very streaky and mottled look to them. So even when they're flying, they'll still have these bowed wings to them, this pointed tail and the pointed head. But when you're looking at them, they're very brown, and they have these little freckles going right the way through them. So that will, you'll notice more that bird. But it doesn't quite matter. There's such a big bird that even from a distance, you'll be able to tell it's a gannet. But when you're looking for darker birds in general, like if you're looking for skuas or things, sometimes when you have a juvenile gannet go past, it makes you second guess yourself. But it's worth remembering with it that they're almost symmetrical in their head and beak is pointed, and their tail and that rump area are pointed as well. And these bowed wings are a great giveaway. So when you look at other species like these, they've got the bowed wings to them, but the wing tips curl round, as opposed to when we look at our gannets don't quite curl round, they curl outwards, and that's just because when they're diving, it's a lot easier to tuck those wings behind their head and hit the water at such an angle that they can really delve deeper into it. So I think we've got time for questions now. So if I can, how do I do this? I'll stop sharing. No, email, thank you. And then I'm sure Caris will share some questions if we have some. But feel free to ask any questions at all, whether it's about birds or whether it's about advice on sea watching or oh, I have to unmute Caris.
Thanks, Dan. There you go. I haven't had any questions apart from one from Zoe just now to say, can you share your email again, please?
I have numerous emails, but I'll pop it in the chat if anyone wanted to contact me. So that's my website, and there's also a contact form on there. But otherwise, if you use that email address, so if there's any birds that you're unsure of or anything that you wanted more specialised advice that you don't ask in public, feel free to, here they all come.
Yep, all coming at once. So we have one from Megan. Where are you likely to see skuas?
Skuas, the best place, especially West Wales, if you go to Strumble Head, it's a really lovely area. But you've also got a purpose-built concrete bunker there, so you haven't got to sit on a cliff top in the rain. You have a nice shelter made out of concrete, so it's a nice area to sit and actually enjoy sea watching, as opposed to gripping hold of your scope, trying not to blow away with it.
Great. We've got a question from Rachel. When we get big gatherings of manxies and gannets off both in summer, is it associated with regular patterns of fish movement?
It's a bit of an odd one. So with manxies, off North Wales and off Pembrokeshire, the manxies travel up to the Scottish coast. So they've actually GPS tagged Manx Shearwaters from Scolma, Stockholm, Ramsey and Bardsey. The Bardsey birds, the Ramsey and Stockholm birds travel northwards towards Glasgow area. And then the Scolma birds actually go out towards Ireland. So when you're having them on different parts of Wales, it'll be either the male or the female that are traveling. But this time of year, well, we're in September now, August to September time, all the juveniles are fledging. So it's not so much the fish movement, it's more the juveniles are now following the adults. So if the adults are moving, the juveniles will just tag along because it's their first year. They haven't quite worked out where they're going yet. So they tend to form large flocks and then raft together, and that's just for protection. So the juveniles are more included, and then they'll sort of adapt that behaviour then, and then work out where's best to feed for themselves.
Great. This is a good one. One from Sally. What bird field guide would you recommend?
So the best one is this one, which is your Collins bird guide. So this has got a lot of pictures in it. If I just find something we talked about today. Where are seabirds in this thing? So it gives you a lot of detail, but also the different plumages of birds. So if we're looking at something like a Manx shearwater, you've got the different underwings and stuff. Because it's drawn, I personally find it easier to work off a drawing than a picture. But if you wanted more specialised sea watching books, there's the perks of having hundreds of books in the house. So there's this one. So this one is brilliant for seabirds. So if you wanted to learn more about seabirds, this is all pictures, but they aren't brilliant pictures, which I personally enjoy because it's very difficult to see what someone means. So if you look at, this is long-tailed skuas. Some of them are in frame, some of them are out of focus, so they look like blurs, and that's just to mimic what you would be seeing. And then you've got some in here that are tiny, tiny speckles, completely out of focus pictures, and that's just what you're looking at. Oh, I'll put those titles in there. So we have the Collins Bird Guide, and then we have the it's the Flight Identification of European Seabirds. It's a bit of a mouthful, but it is a really, really great book if you wanted to get more into seabirds, because it almost mimics what you would be watching. So whether it's out of focus, there's heat, haze on the horizon, whether it's raining and there's speckles on your glass, it's got all those types of pictures in there. So it is one that I do take out a lot. I think this is our second or third copy of it.
Question from David. Are there particularly good times to do a sea watch?
A sea watch, it will depend where you're sitting if you want to get really technical. So Strumble Head, you want northwest winds, and that will fetch over the birds that are hanging around between Ireland and between Wales. I was trying to remember what the English word for Wales was then. But between Ireland and Wales, northwesterlies will force them over towards the horizon. You'll be able to spot them better. If you're up north, ideally you want northeasterlies, so that will drag them down the coast towards you. And then in the south, southwesterlies or southeasterlies are a good one as well. But in overall thing, the best weather is a nice overcast weather, so you don't get heat haze, so that eliminates one thing that you haven't got to worry about. But so overcast weather with a nice wind. It doesn't need to be gusty. If it's like a consistent wind, then that's the best weather to sit and do some sea watching. But any weather's fine.
Tide times, I'm sure, are also important when looking out to sea.
It'll depend where you are. If you're sitting on the sea, like Cardigan Bay, the tide doesn't quite matter. But if you're somewhere that relies on somewhere like the estuary that needs to push stuff in, then you need high tide then, or approaching high tide. So if high tide's at 1 o'clock, you want to get there for about 12 o'clock, 11:30, and then as the tide comes in, it pulls things in with it, so it's got that false hope of that it's a deeper water than what it is. They tend to reach the bridge there, and then U-turn and head back out towards Whitford.
Thank you. We have a question from Shanice saying thank you for the presentation. Could you tell us a little more information on the organisation you work for and what you do in the day-to-day, please?
I'm actually freelance, so I work for myself, which is quite lovely. Not so lovely during COVID and lockdown. But for me, I work for a variety of different things. I think I have about 20 or 25 different jobs. So day to day, I work for a TV production company, so I write scripts for if there's like the one show, if there's something about birds, I would have written it. There's 2 more TV shows coming out for BBC Wales that I've written the whole scripts for, and I've picked what birds I want to be in it. But that's my day-to-day job. And then I run a bird tours company as well. So that is, I take people out to see birds. We're starting to do more across Wales now. And then generally I write books, do talks, present TV, present radio. I have a clothing company. But yeah, a bunch of different stuff.
What's the name of your tour?
It's called Tadorna Tours. So Tadorna is the Latin name for shelduck, one of my favourite species of birds. But yeah, Tadorna Tours.
Brilliant. I'm sure you'll get a lot more traffic once COVID's over.
Hopefully.
We've had a few questions. Where do you recommend in Pembrokeshire for seabirds?
Oh, Strumble Head. Strumble Head is one of my favourite ones. If it's Strumble Head can be quite busy. There's a lot of locals that love to go there, but otherwise you've got Munt near Cardigan Bay. That's a nice area to sit. But if you want more seabirds in Pembrokeshire itself, you've got Martin's Haven, which is where you get the boat to Skomer. There's a nice cliff top there that you can sit on, and you can almost pick out Grasholm, Stockholm and Skomer from there. So you get a nice variety of different birds from that area as well.
back to Manxies. Myra regularly sees Manxies heading north up Cardigan Bay in the early morning and south in the evening. Is this part of the regular patterns that you were talking about?
Yeah, so Manxies only come to land in the dark, and that's because they're not very adapted to land. Their legs are towards their bum area as opposed to being center in the body, so they can't run. They can barely walk on land. So they'll head in the morning, they'll head to where they feed. So if it's from Cardigan Bay, if it's from the Stockholm population, or even Ramsey, they'll head north towards Scotland to feed. And then when they come back in the evening, they'll come back to their islands. You probably see them going south towards, from Scotland, back towards the islands where their burrows are, because they are site faithful, so they return to the same burrow every single year.
Brilliant. Another question about books from Rachel. Can you recommend any books that give more information on coastal bird behaviour, ecology, etc., rather than just ID?
If you want more of the ecology-based ones, ID books do give some brief ecology to it, but there are, it'll depend on the area you are. So there's a new book coming out next year called Birds in Wales, or Birds of Wales. That will give the full distribution maps. I haven't got the old one, but we've got some different ones. But that will tell you all the maps of the area, the country. It'll give you population trends, conservation struggles, what work has been done on them, that kind of stuff. So if you want more about data, then you've got the BTO Bird Atlas, there's Birds of Wales coming out next year. And then we've got, if you're a member of WWT as well, you can read online on the blogs as well. That will give you more about coastal, especially wildfowl related stuff. You'll have updates from there, as well as BTO. You can sign up for updates from them, and they'll give you like webs trends and stuff, and that's just species populations and more about what they're doing and what conservation projects are going on as well.
Got a question from Carrio. Oh, I've lost it. 1 second. How do seasons affect sea watching?
So most birds will be breeding. So if we're looking for breeding birds, then you'll have more auks in the summer months, and you'll have more shearwaters in the summer months, because they're migratory species, same as terns. They'll all depart around October time, so they'll all migrate to where they need to go. So your shearwaters will go towards Brazil, your terns will go up towards the Arctic. So the best months, if you want to get your eye in, if you want to get more of a look in on species, then doing it in the summer months is best when they're at the full plumage, because they'll be a lot easier to tell from field guides and a lot easier to tell based off of what they look like. But the best time, if you want to see a diverse range of species, the best time is autumn time. So between end of August towards October, this is when we get our big winds, and this is when we get loads more skuas. We'll have different gulls coming in. If you look online, there's the Pembrokeshire Birds blog, and that's got Strumblehead as well, and you can see what they find off there. So you've got Sabines gulls, there's sooty shearwaters coming in, there's Bonaparte's gulls coming in. So October time is basically roller dice and see what rocks up, as opposed to pre-planned birds. So it is a really exciting time, especially seeing all the different stuff that comes up as well.
Everyone should get out now.
Yeah, that's what we're doing on the weekend.
Got a question about binoculars. Which would be most suitable to view birds, 8 times or 10 times bins or spotting scope?
If you want seabirds, then I would recommend a scope. It doesn't need to be anything fancy. It can literally be, my first scope was a £12.99 one from Aldi, and that served me well for a good few years. I think I had that scope for about 10 years, and then I moved on to a larger scope, but still didn't have the magnification I have now. So I have now a 20 to 75 times, but that's just because I get very tired with my eyes and I can only see it with one eye properly. So it's better to have something that you trust more, but any type of scope for seabirds is a lot better. But if you're just doing coastal birds and you like coastal walks and you want to look more at waders, then you can get away with binoculars as well. I personally don't enjoy 10 times binoculars because I find them a lot heavier. And when you're holding them, to hold something like that for so long, that extra weight, I just find it hurts my wrists a bit. So I prefer my 8 times ones, and that means you get a lot more light into them, but you just lose it out on that magnification. But I prefer an 8 times binocular with a spotting scope. But if you have a scope and you find you get tired with it, you can always get scope packs, which is basically like this little rucksack you put on your scopes and then you can carry it on your back, which I prefer rather than trying to carry it over one shoulder. I just find it hurts my shoulders. So I have a little rucksack for my scope.
Great. Another question about your career from Saskia. Your job sounds extremely interesting. What is your background career pathway? How did you specialise in birds and end up writing scripts for TV and radio?
So my career started when I was about 12 or 13. So I signed up to the BTO Webs Counts. And on the Webs Counts, then you've got the chance to have your own regular patch. And then once you're surveying that regular patch, then you become accustomed to what you're likely to expect. I did a lot of, there was a group, the RSPB Phoenix group, where it was young birders that got to go into it. And then we'd do meetups and stuff. And then from there, then I started working at WWT when I was, I volunteered at 16, and then I was employed at 18, and then I left last year. So I was there for a very long time. And that was working aviculture learning assistant, and basically just teaching people about birds. So it's one of those things that you have a specialty, but I like birds, I like all birds, but I specialise in wildfowl because I don't know everything about everything. I know what I'm looking at, but when it comes to other birds, like American birds or Asian birds, I haven't got a clue. I can research it, which is what the best thing about my career is. I have a lot of contacts. So that's how I ended up doing it with TV, is I've worked with a lot of different organizations. I've networked, so I went to as many as events. I've done things like this. I'd be on online courses almost every week learning. And then lots of books. As you can see, we've got 2 floor to ceiling bookshelves full of books. So reading, online courses, and even meeting up. So if you've got a bird club, go into the meetings and networking, getting to know people. I find it more enjoyable to spend time with people and learn, as opposed to sitting on my own in the house trying to learn. So it's one of those things.
Just to explain, the web survey is the wetland bird survey run by the BTO, where you just choose a patch of coastline and record everything in that coastline on a certain day every month. They are still looking for volunteers, especially in the Carlin Bay area, just to put that out there.
Yeah, we do struggle trying to get people. It's a really good one if anyone wanted a nice easy one to do. It's not like a tick sheet, you just count what you see. So if you don't know what it is, you haven't got to record it. So it's just counting what you see, and then all that goes into nationalised data to work out population trends.
We have another book question from Gordon. Have you read Adam Nicholson's book, The Seabirds Cry? And if so, how would you rate it?
I really like the book, so it's up on the reading one somewhere. But I really do like it. It's more about the decline in species, what has happened, that kind of. It's more like a story. So even though it's got a lot of facts and figures in it, it's more like a story. So I do really like it. There's a few books that I like it. You've got The Seabirds Cry. There's Curlew Moon as well, which is by Mary Colwell. There's another one called Wintering, and that's about goose populations, and people's experiences of seeing geese. So I do like birds like that, where it's not like you're looking at graphs and figures and trying to work out things like that. It's more telling the story. So I do really like books like that, and I really do like that book as well.
Brilliant. We've had a question about whether we can organise a wildfowl presentation. Maybe we'll have one of those in the pipelines. We'll have to ask Dan back. Any other questions from anyone?
We'll be here for hours if I'm talking about ducks and geese.
Anyone for another question? If not, thank you very much, Dan. I'm sure we've all learnt a lot. And if you could send me the handout, I will send it to everyone in the course right now, and it is recorded, so everyone will be able to watch it again. But for now, thank you very much. Everyone's sending their thanks on the chat.
I can see them all pinging in now. I've worked out where I'm looking.
Thank you very much. I think we'll wrap it up here. So thanks for coming, everyone. Thanks, Dan. I think you can finish the course.
Yeah, so thank you all for coming along to it. It's been really interesting sharing everything, as well as the questions. I do love questions. You do get some really questions that make you think, but thank you all for coming. It's been great.